Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real World Productivity Podcast. I'm Adam Moody, and today I'm talking with Kyle Gray about his background, his great book, Story Engine, and the use of storytelling and automation, as well as team building to increase your productivity and get real results for you and your business. So with that, let's get going. Welcome, Kyle.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam.
Yeah, definitely. We're just going to jump right in today. My first question is really about you and your background and experience. So people can get a little bit better idea of who you are if somehow they've been living under a rock and don't know who you are. But could you tell us a little bit about yourself just in terms of background, education, experience, anything like that you feel like sharing?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm honored. I'm honored that you mentioned you had heard about me or been following me for a while, and I appreciate that. So my background, I got my start actually. We were just before we started recording the call, working for a startup I was living in Chiang Mai, Thailand. The founder and my boss and mentor was living in Brisbane, Australia, or near the Gold Coast. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the rest of the company was actually scattered around the world. We had a couple of dozen WordPress developers in the Philippines and Central America and Eastern Europe, and always had a team active. So that's how I got my start kind of working on this remote team. And my job was actually to watch what was happening in the business and create strategies for people to connect with. How do I share our story about our business? How do I collaborate and create great content with other startup founders in the industry? How do I attract attention to our brand? And a lot of that came from writing good content. And at first, it was really, really difficult. My educational background is in international affairs. I got a master's degree in international affairs from the University of Utah, but didn't have much experience in business, or I had some experience in kind of content writing. I had created several of my own blogs in the past, but what I was doing before and writing academic papers is one thing, but then being graded by an audience of thousands of people on Twitter, on Facebook, and in email open rates and things like that, a totally different story. And so at first it was really challenging, and I didn't have quite the mindset, especially in the beginning. I kind of had an employee mindset versus an entrepreneurial one, where I really wanted to write all the articles myself, create all the content. It was such a pain working with other writers. And so I was better than them and I could write stuff faster. But in the end, I just wasn't able to keep up with the goals and the amount of content we wanted to create. And so slowly I had to make my way over to building teams and making things more scalable at that so I could hit our goals for achieving the amount of content we needed created and do lots of other things that are required to keep the content promoted and fresh and growing. And that was, I was working probably for a year with that startup. Mm-hmm. And since then, it's kind of been an adventure. I got a base skill from this apprenticeship. I actually was just recording kind of a podcast reflecting on being an apprentice for a while and changing your mindset from just kind of being an employee and doing what you need to do to actually like trying to problem solve, trying to improve systems, always actually trying to delegate yourself out of a job so that you can move on and be learning new things and taking on new challenges.
That's a really good point. Just as a quick side note, it's funny, I had this conversation with my assistant, and I was trying to get her in that mindset of creating these processes and starting to think, hey, what if you hired yourself an assistant, or I hire you one for you? And, she expressed concern that, well, what if I work myself out of a job? I started laughing, and, she was wondering, like, what's going on? I was like, if you are able to do that, you're going to be the most valuable person that works for you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so powerful. It's not something that I think most people naturally try to work for, or even like your assistant mentioned, can really comprehend. And yeah, sometimes you've got to you've got to, as the entrepreneur, drive that yourself, or sometimes, somebody who you bring in as an assistant versus an apprentice, they may have different degrees of expectations on how entrepreneurial you'd want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's a crucial element to bringing on good people and being able to succeed in business. But I think one thing that's exciting is I feel like the world we live in, the landscape of making things online, everybody's getting lessons in those exact skill sets and creating things and understanding quality and building stuff. So I think there's an exciting future where there's going to be plenty of people around who are very talented and can help each other grow.
Definitely. Just for background for people, what was the timeline for this when you were in Thailand?
So this was probably it started in November 2014.
Okay.
I had just finished school in May of 2014 and was teaching a little bit of entrepreneurship at the University of Utah before I got this job. Had taken off for Asia and did a little bit of traveling, and then met Dan at a conference in November of 2014, and I stayed on with WP Curve until about maybe the end of 2015. And shortly thereafter, they ended up being acquired by GoDaddy.
Okay.
Which was a pretty cool win.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So that sets a stage as far as time and then leading up to now. And you also talked about once you hopped on with them that you were starting to kind of build the team, that you realized you basically hit your wall and said, I can't do this all on my own. Had you done anything like that before that point, or was this kind of a trial by fire in terms of team building?
Definitely a trial by fire. I did some minor things to manage people. One of my really weird kind of very early starts in entrepreneurship was actually looking around for or building niche websites. So I'd look up keywords like plaid pants or gluten-free crackers, or I had these weird websites.
I love this 100%. This is exactly how I got started. So
yeah. And so I would find the keyword, build a website around it, and they would be kind of these pretty basic, crappy WordPress themes. And then I'd go on to places like Fiverr and a couple of other outsourcing sites, and then I'd hire people. I'd have very specific templates of saying, like, I want you to write 500 words. I need you to say this word this many times. Very, very low quality SEO content, which, back in those days maybe could fly. Yeah. But it really wasn't like I maybe had invested $500 in that. And over the course of like 6 or 7 months gaining interest in that, I probably had made, every time somebody clicks on an ad on your plaid pants website, you make like a nickel or something like that. So it's not really
the ROI isn't huge unless you know what you're doing in those,
unless you can if you can do it at scale, and that's really where it seemed to be interesting, is if you could create like 10 or 20 of those. But really, not what I thought my core skill set was, which is always really evolving. It's really interesting. It's sometimes hard to find a really good groove on a product or a service that you're all about. I keep like expanding horizons and seeing new things and getting excited. And perhaps that's a good thing, especially in context of plaid pants and moving on from tiny little SEO niche websites.
Mm-hmm. So there was one more thing I wanted to touch on, and then I'm definitely going to circle back to the team building, because I think that's a really big point and something you've got a lot of experience with. But obviously, you wrote The Story Engine. It's a great book. I recommend anybody listening who's doing anything with content or even thinking about it or has a team that's doing it, go get it, read it. But I have known I think, did you just put out, or I may be a little behind the times, but a book called The College Entrepreneur?
So that actually came out before The Story Engine. That is my first.
Oh man, I really mixed that.
Yeah.
That's funny. I just saw it and thought, oh wow, it's something new. I've got to check this out sometime.
No, there is I'm actually in the editing phases of my third book, so I'm just on the cusp of bringing out a new one. But The College Entrepreneur, and funny that this all involves all these interesting locations. I actually wrote this when I was living in Medellin, Colombia.
Okay, awesome.
I had spent 3 months down there. This was actually right after I had left WP Curve. And at the time, I was seeing a lot of discourse, kind of in the entrepreneurial ring of like, is college worth it? And kind of the consensus wasn't very positive. And then, I had recently just left kind of the university space and worked in many different areas in there. And they kind of still, felt pretty steady as she goes. And so I didn't really agree with either of these things. I thought there was kind of a middle ground where I believed like there's there's more to succeeding in university than being in a classroom. You can use your university's money, resources, reputation to actually build a business and create something interesting and maybe even profitable while you're in school, so that you graduate with much more than a degree. Even if it's like a photo blog, I think that's fine, or a blog about, if you're in neuroscience and you're just kind of talking about what you're learning in classes, or following other people and making comments and things like that, to actually having full-fledged, very profitable businesses and leveraging different scholarships and resources and programs and competitions. And so it was just kind of a perspective shift in what makes for a good college experience, and what you should focus on and what you see as important, because it's not just about checking the boxes and getting the piece of paper. It's really about the relationships and the skill sets and connections you leave with.
Definitely. I think that, you've really hit on that, and that it's really that kind of intermingling, like learning those skill sets outside the classroom is important. But then you said, using the resources, which I think is a good thing, because this conversation does come up quite a bit. And like you said, people, I feel it swung back a little bit, but people were definitely pretty against. At least you would see people online commenting quite a bit about, school is a waste of time. You should just hustle and build a business. And I was always interested, because I also went the college route. And, from my experience, I was like, well, that didn't necessarily make me better or more prepared to build a business, but I definitely got things out of that I wouldn't just throw away. And I think, as a lot of things, there's probably the right answer somewhere in the middle, probably, like you're saying.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, it's just,
no. I was just kind of thinking about that.
But so The College Entrepreneur, that was really mostly a passion book. It was like this idea that I had, and I really felt the need to share that. But it was also a good lesson in learning that. I think it was well positioned. It's been really well reviewed on Amazon. But it's really in a category that doesn't get a lot of traffic, and there's not a lot I can do to really promote or sell the book. Like, the only thing that the book creates is its own royalties right now, and so it's like difficult to try and move a lot of those books. But for the story engine, one of the nicest things about this, and it doesn't quite go into team building, but I think it's worth noting, is that it was used, it had a much broader use and was much more powerful, from what you had mentioned, I think before we got on this call, using a lot of the templates, is through people reading the book, I was able to collect and build an email list. And over the course of nearly 2 years that the book has been out, I've been able to create an email list of around 5,000 people, which now are listening to my podcast or following the articles that I'm publishing, or hearing about the different things that I'm up to. And so it's created more of a sustainable following, which has enabled me to keep the price low for the book, because I know that I'm going to get more value on the back end, and I just want to see the email list grow.
Definitely.
So it's been really interesting seeing how each of those books have unfolded for me, and what benefits they've driven.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think there's a lot of value in this, and I haven't personally done this, but now from running a business or two, I can look back and see that there's such a high value in this, because that list is built up of people that you provided value through, but who also saw that value and then bought the book, and then probably other people referring people. So you're getting really warm referrals, which is so much better than just say, cold traffic or just paying directly for ads. I have nothing against paid ads. It's a great avenue. But then developing this sort of resource can take a long time, but the payoff can be, I think, enormous, both in terms of kind of goodwill and value as well as monetary.
That's definitely my long-term strategy. I want to continue building value, continue creating this audience, and connecting with people, not just through the book, but in lots of different avenues. And so one day I do believe that just having, a large enough list is something that can support an individual or a business. And definitely, I think I'm a ways away from that, but that's why I'm building my podcast, and that's kind of the heart of the Story Engine, is just this nice slow burn, slow growth, but steady and predictable and powerful in the long run.
Nice. Well, let's circle back a little bit, because we talked a little bit about team building and how you kind of got thrown in the fire there in terms of figuring it out. But I'm curious how you started doing that. And then in terms of, did you have a process to follow? Did you kind of come up with it? And then I guess, where are you at now? We can kind of break this down. I guess just where did you start at? Did you have any help? How did you do it?
Yeah. So I would think about the different tasks I was doing, and think about, at the time working at WP Curve, the main things I was doing was bringing more writers on. And so I started to think about, what do these writers need to see to reduce the amount of feedback I need to give them? And so we had a somewhat developed content strategy document, and but it wasn't quite clear or coherent yet. And so I kind of redeveloped that and put it together in a way that somebody could read and get a good idea of, like, okay, who is this? What's our story? What do we have to say? And how do we say that? And what does some of our best stuff look like? And then also a style guide, which was this was a really, really powerful one, working with dozens of writers, and every time a writer, did something that I needed to give them feedback on, I would just write that inside the style guide. And I wrote the style guide in a way that would kind of be like, if you're doing your first draft or your original research, the information at the top will help you with that. As you're continuing with your drafting, then it gets a little bit as you scroll down, and then finally what you need to do when you're publishing. So it was kind of intuitive and easier for the writers, and that was some of the really big leaps forward in how I was starting to bring on going from, I guess, just myself to having maybe 10 different writers on the team at one time.
Were you using like OneOff Writers, or did you start off like, hey, I want you to write an article, and then if it was good enough, you'd do some sort of continuing arrangement, or how did that work?
It was all kinds. So there were some writers that I would continuously pitch. There were some writers that I would just have, like, here's a list of articles that you can pick from that we've kind of researched, or you can pitch an article to me. There were guest writers who would just come and write one article for us for free. And then there were other one-off writers that we would pay for individual articles.
Gotcha. Okay. And where did you go to find these people?
Some of them I was just asking other writers for referrals. Later on in this, and after WP Curve, when I've done this for clients, I've gone to Upwork and kind of pasted a lot of the parameters of who I was looking for people who have interests in the areas that I am writing on. And just kind of put together like simple requirements, ability to follow instructions, and testing for things like that on Upwork have led to really good writers, really good talent. And recently, I've been connected with another person who has a team of writers that I've used to white label as far as my own writing team and kind of content writing goes. But I also these days employ a lot of different copywriters who are writing more sales copy, landing page, sales funnel design. And one of the things that I think is really important these days and really exciting and really good for anybody running a small business is I love, I have an assistant myself, and it's changed things drastically for my business, but I really love being able to hire very good talent to do a really specific job and just apply their time and their energy to that perfect fit job, and then let them, continue on doing whatever it is they're doing. So you can just bring somebody on who's really talented to help you out and to help you increase the value you can deliver for your clients. So have them work their magic, and then keep them on the list to contact for the next project.
Definitely.
And if you can have just a good Rolodex of talent like that can jump in and jump out of a project, then you can again add a lot of scale to what you're doing, help a lot more people, and have a lot more time to do fun things like making podcasts.
Definitely. Well, then I'm curious, because you've worked with enough people, like you said, you have an assistant. Do you have someone who you consider kind of a project manager, maybe more of the role like you used to do, or do you still find yourself doing a lot of that?
I still find myself doing a lot of project management. I've kind of gone from moving away from as much implementation in my services to kind of half implementation, half coaching. But I'm still kind of managing the flow of how things work, and then simply, I think one of my skills that I've developed, through the story engine process is not necessarily. I think I'm a good writer, but I think I'm a very good communicator with writers, and so being able to explain what's needed crisply and succinctly to them so that they can do their best job. I think it's been a really beneficial skill.
Definitely. Going back to writing specifically, I was thinking about this one, really wanted your input, because I talked to a lot of people, and some people either dislike or their strong point is not writing, especially maybe communication they're working on, but writing is never going to be their thing. Do you have any recommendations for what people should do as far as, hey, I either need to or I have to create some sort of written content, but that's not my strong point. What's my next step?
So what I would do is start with a piece of content that you feel really comfortable creating. And if it's not writing, the two other big obvious ones are audio content or video content. And either of these are very, very easy to repurpose. So once you create a good video, or if you want, just record, a podcast yourself, write out some bullet points, and then talk about an idea, or interview somebody that has some interesting ideas, and then take that recording and get it transcribed. And then you can hand it off to a writer to say, turn this into something that looks like an article. It sometimes takes a couple of tries back and forth. And even if one of the challenges still, if you're not a great writer, is still being able to communicate what you want from them and how it should look. And so using things like a good style guide are going to be really helpful in that process. But yeah, having somebody, and usually I would say, if you record a 15-minute podcast, that's going to be around 1,000, 1,500 words. Mm-hmm. And so you would probably, the best way to turn that into good written content would maybe be cut that down to about half of, whatever you start with. and it should be pretty crisp written content. And so
Definitely.
you can take what you've created in a more comfortable medium and build it into writing. I've been doing a lot of that with my podcast, just because I haven't been able to keep up with the article writing on my site between clients and finishing up this next book.
Gotcha. And it makes sense too. On your podcast, at least, I think you mentioned a really good point, or rather, you mentioned a good point just now about your podcast that I liked, is people get used to it being either a conversation in terms of you're just listening to the people who more than one that are talking. But I see, with yours, you do both. You'll have guests on, but you'll also record these generally shorter episodes where you're covering a topic and just hitting a few points and going forward and doing that. I think people have kind of gotten away from that. I feel like that was kind of something people did more in the beginning of podcasting, and that hasn't really happened. So I'm definitely looking forward to putting that to use. And I think that's something people could do quite easily. And like you're saying, repurposing it is really easy.
I think it's powerful. And I do think, though, writing is definitely a quickly changing field, but having good writing in the online, I think, is still one of the best ways to signal to Google that you're good for search engine optimization. It creates opportunities for good links to be passed back and forth between you and people you're collaborating with. And I think it's a really, really ripe medium. And I think it's definitely still valuable to be creating great written content these days.
Definitely. Totally agree. So with your background, all the stuff you've done, you're writing books. I believe you have your own agency, right? Conversion Cake. Is that correct?
That's true. I haven't been. It's just called Conversion Cake these days, which was kind of the name I registered when I was originally doing conversion rate optimization. Mm-hmm. But really, I've built most of the brand now around the Story Engine. Mm-hmm. It's the Story Engine podcast, Story Engine website. So that's kind of the more forward-facing brand, where the only time you'll see the Conversion Cake logo anymore is probably if you get an invoice from me.
Gotcha. So having all these projects, you've come a long ways. You've got a lot still going on and things you've already accomplished. Looking back, what would you tell people who maybe already, they've started a team, they've got something going, they already have a business, they're seeing some success, but, looking ahead, what would you tell that person, or what would you tell Kyle, like 3 or 4 years ago?
I think, one of the challenges I've had is taking on a lot of different projects. I get easily excited about things. I can get emotional and just like start off on a project. Like most of the books I wrote was either in like some low point had just happened, and I'm like, I need to do something, and so I start writing a book. But I've taken on a lot of different things and a lot of different projects. But I think the advice I'd give myself now and in the past is find what you're really good at, find what you're brilliant at, find what is driving revenue for your business and focus there, and then find ways to be able to delegate what you're doing. You can start really easily by just like writing down the tasks you're doing every day and keeping a close record of what's happening a lot. And you'll start to notice where these things are that are taking up a lot of your time. And you should be focusing more on where you're brilliant, not what takes a lot of time, and starting to hand those off. An assistant can absolutely change your business, or making that first, second, or third hire for somebody who can fit into just the position you need in your business to make you move forward, and giving them a little bit of good documentation, good instructions, good checklists for how they can do their job, how you like it. Or another really good thing these days is like Screencast-O-Matic is just a place that you can record a quick video for all kinds of different tasks, especially for screen things, just record you. This is how I send an email. This is how I set up an appointment in Calendly. And just collecting little, dozens of little 5-minute videos like that. You don't even have to be a great writer as long as you can record and talk over a recording. You can really bring in a lot of talent that will handle things for you.
Definitely. I think those are hugely important. And I think that a lot of times we lose sight that stuff is kind of iterative, that over time, you record that one video and have your assistant or somebody set up like your Calendly, like you said, that may take 5 minutes. But if you do that once a week and you're knocking these things out regularly, that really starts to snowball pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
Well, we're running a little short on time, but I got a couple more questions for you. And I'm curious about this, and people really are interested in what other people use. So if you don't mind, what tools and apps do you find yourself using the most to stay organized or productive?
Trello is a big one. I've always been a big fan of Trello.
Mm-hmm.
It's helped me with working projects for clients. It's helped me. It's been my main tool for kind of organizing and writing my books, actually. It's been very, very useful for that. Let's see what else. I use BombBomb, which is an email software. It actually creates little videos that you can send in your emails.
Oh, cool.
And that's been one of the most incredible outreach softwares. So I'll use that to reach out to clients. Hey, it was great seeing you at the conference. Or reach out to potential podcast hosts that I would like to be on their show, or people, owners of events, and I want to be on their stages. It makes a really great first impression.
That's great. Yeah, big fan of video emails. We use that for client prospecting, and you get enormously better response rates. So 2 thumbs up on that one. Last question for you, Kyle. I guess we'll have to exclude we don't have to, but I'm going to exclude your own books. But besides the books you've written, which book do you recommend the most to people?
This one is kind of a hidden gem that I really, really love. It's only available on Kindle, I believe. It's called Progression by Sebastian Marshall. And I think it's really well written. Sebastian tells these really interesting stories. It reminds me of a kind of Robert Greene or Ryan Holiday, where he talks about maybe a historical figure or a person, and then teaches really good ways to solve problems and make decisions and manage yourself and organize yourself. And people in your audience who love productivity, who can manage their details and track things really well, I think will be really, really well served by this book. It takes me so long to read through it because I just read a page and there's so much good ideas that I chew on. And then, so I go through it really, really slow. But I think it's really one of my favorites. It's a lot of fun.
Outstanding. Good one. I haven't come across that. I will definitely read it. I just, a couple weeks ago, for the first time, listened to a podcast that Sebastian was featured in. And he had some really good stuff around outreach, around all sorts of stuff. So appreciate the advice, and everyone else should probably check that out as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah, definitely. And Kyle, again, I appreciate you taking the time. It's awesome to talk to you. I know everyone's going to get a ton of good stuff out of this talk. But if people want to find out more about you, where should they be heading, and what can they do?
Yeah, you can check me out at thestoryengine.co, not .com.co. And there I have lots of great written articles on storytelling, on crafting processes that share how you add value to your clients and how you can reach out and research and build relationships with content marketing. Lots of good stuff on there. You can learn more about my book. You can check out my podcast, or you can get in touch with me there. I'd love to hear from anyone on big takeaways from the show, or if there's any follow-up questions from that.
Awesome. Definitely. All right. Well, that'll do it for today. Thanks again, Kyle, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
And thanks to you for listening to this podcast episode today. It can be really beneficial to hear about how others approach productivity, organization, and optimizing their business and life. And if you're interested in taking your productivity and efficiency up a few notches, head to www.productivity.academy/start. There, you'll find my Productivity Academy guidebook, which I recommend for all listeners who want to improve their lives and know that there are better ways to getting where they want to go. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.